and welcome to a brand new episode of Talking Law from Women in the Law UK. I'm Sally Penni, a barrister based in Manchester at Kenworthy's Chambers and the Joint Vice Chair of the Association of Women Barristers. I'm also the founder of Women in the Law UK, an organisation which is passionate about supporting the next leaders in law. We put on regular events, host masterclasses, and also enjoy an annual dinner and conference. Do come and learn more about what we do at womeninthelawuk.com. You could also connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Women in the Law UK. On this episode of Talking Law, I was really excited to sit down and talk to multi-medal winning Paralympian, politician, coach and presenter Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson. One of Britain's greatest Paralympian athletes, Tanni has had a varied career across so many sectors. So we started by talking about her working life.
So I was an athlete for 25 years, a Paralympian. I competed in wheelchair racing. I competed at 5 games. Won 16 Paralympic medals, 11 of them gold. Actually, if I'm being really honest, I always wanted to be a lawyer. All the way through school, I wanted to be a sports person and a lawyer.
Did you?
Yeah, that was my dream job. I was going to do law. And then I then sort of discovered Loughborough University, which was, where a lot of very good sports people went and go. And then when I started looking at the degrees they had on offer, they didn't have a law degree. But I really wanted to go to Loughborough. So I did a politics degree at Loughborough, which I thought was kind of close enough. And the plan always was, when I retired, that I was going to do law conversion. And then I had the opportunity when I retired to go into the House of Lords. So I sit as an independent crossbench peer. Yes. And I mean, it's pretty close to the law because we sort of make it and shape it. And then I thought, actually, it's probably not a good idea to do law conversion now in case I don't pass or something. So, and also, to be fair, I mean, we work really long hours, so having the time to do law conversion would be quite difficult. And so it was almost my plan to end up in law somewhere. My plan wasn't to ever quite be in the House of Lords, but, it's sort of close enough.
So your retirement is taken up in the House of Lords. Just going backwards, really, law has actually been a crucial part of your life since being at school and to later on in the House of Lords. Last year, when you came to speak at the Women in Law conference as our keynote guest speaker, you talked about when you were in school and your own disability and really looking at the laws and your parents looking at the laws. Can you just share some of that with us?
Yes, so I was born with spina bifida. I could walk a little bit when I was young, but then I'm actually missing the bones at the back of my vertebra. So there's quite a few bones that aren't properly formed. So what happened was that my legs never developed properly, but as I grew, my spinal cord collapsed, and it was actually my own vertebra that severed my spinal cord but then paralysed me. So I was paralysed from about the age of 6, and I was in mainstream junior school, and that was all fine. But then when I was due to go to high school, I thought I was going to go to the same school my sister was at. And then we found out that actually children like me weren't meant to be in mainstream education and we were meant to be in special school and locked away from everyone else. So when my parents found out this and, started looking at the special school system, which at the time it was not a great level of education, the most I could have come out with was a couple of CSEs, and there wasn't a choice of subjects that I could have done. I couldn't have done any sciences, I couldn't have, there was lots I couldn't do. My parents were just like, well, this is not the place for you to be. So my dad, very lucky, was educated, read the right newspapers, knew there was someone called Mary Warnock who had written, a lot on education for disabled children. Yes. Had written a white paper on education, and my dad basically threatened to sue the Secretary of State for Wales over my right to be educated in a mainstream school. So, my first experience of white and green papers, I was 10 years old. And I remember my dad saying to me, you need to read and understand this because this is important stuff. And, I didn't realise 30 years later that it'd be a massive part of my life. But I mean, for me, what was incredible was that by the 30 years later, I'm in the House of Lords. We have a debate which is tabled by Baroness Warnock, which is what's happened in the 30 years since her groundbreaking work on education for disabled people. And I get to sit in the chamber and say, because of you, I'm here.
Yeah.
So it was, for me, it was like this kind of big circle, which was amazing actually for me to be able to, to be able to say thank you to her in such a public way.
Mm. Now you've become somewhat of an activist, really, if I can use that word, probably a bit different to Gina Miller, but in campaigning for access rights, disabled rights. I think you were part of the case on access on buses for wheelchair users and various other legislation and testing it. I wonder, what was it like for you when you joined the House of Lords, one, as a woman, and two, a woman in a wheelchair? I mean, was it accessible? I mean, I've been there with you, and it looks better because you know where you're going. But
it's actually a reasonably accessible building. I mean, it's old, so it's not going to be perfect, but I can get everywhere. I have to say, it's the most equitable place I've ever worked. I wouldn't. That's probably not true for every member of staff there, because there is a hierarchy which we have to, do. Quite a bit of work to knock down, to be honest. But actually, once you're a peer, then you are treated as a peer. I've always felt quite equal. But we have to check and challenge that, because it is a male-dominated building. Politics is dominated. There is a hierarchy, and I think if we need to evolve, and we want to evolve, we need to sort of challenge some of these things. But my personal experience has always been, very positive. And it's hard because, when you go there, I mean, when I went there, you don't really get an induction. It was basically, here's your staff pass, off you go. And here's the companion to the standing orders, which is your rule book. So some of the stuff I did in the early years there's quite a lot of naivety around it, where it's like, well, I don't agree with that. I'm going to... So sometimes the energy you need in the building is quite... Because we're on our own. We don't have staff. We don't have researchers. It's just me answering all the emails. So sometimes it can feel a bit lonely and a bit isolating. But actually, my life as an athlete was a bit like that. So it's just learning to do things in a different way.
Yes. Well, just on that, I suppose, being an athlete is lonely. Sometimes we get the impression that you're, surrounded by thousands of teams, and of course you win and what have you. Is the reality like then being in the House of Lords, where you're doing your own work? Because, the members of Parliament, the MPs, they've got researchers and all sorts of teams, haven't they?
Yeah, we dream of having that. So no, I mean, because that's the sort of quite traditional way it was based. We don't have a budget or support staff for any help. So, I mean, as an athlete, you ultimately have to do the training. There aren't any shortcuts to that. So, I do have help from different people with speeches or fact checking, or, there's some very kind barristers that, I might ring up and say, does this make sense? Can I sense check? And that helps. But ultimately, I'm the one responsible for writing my speeches and amendments. So you just have to crack on with it. And you can't do it 5 minutes before a debate. You have to plan and prepare. So the same way as an athlete, you can't just do it. You can't train 2 weeks before a major games, because actually you won't have made the team. So in sport, a lot of it's really dull and boring. And, I'll be really honest, the process of writing speeches is not exciting. And then you only find out on the morning that you'll have an indication of how long you're going to speak. Because, if something's time limited, you start working out the numbers of how many people have got their name on the list. But it's only on the morning you find out that you've got 3 minutes, and you have to be done and dusted in 3 minutes. So it's a different time pressure to the one I was used to as an athlete. But I guess I'm used to having to hit times and time targets, because that's what you do as an athlete, and that's what you do in the Lords.
Yes, absolutely. Tell me, because people might not know, but those who sit in the House of Lords are not elected, as we know. You are an independent peer, which means you don't belong to any party, and you're appointed in your own right, as it were. Does that give you sort of more autonomy to kind of question, object things, or do you, or impartiality perhaps?
I think everyone actually has quite a lot of impartiality, and even the party peers, they can't do anything to get rid of you. So if you rebel against your party, the most they can do is kind of give you that very disappointed look. So the party can make things more challenging for a peer, and ultimately they could remove the whip. But they can't threaten you with deselection if you speak against, what the leader wants. So I think a lot of people feel an amount of freedom. I mean, within sort of the rules and regulations, and we're very, very polite to each other, you do have an ability to ask questions, to put the minister on the spot. You've got written questions, we have oral questions every day, and there's been a big change actually, and now we're online. We have more time every day to challenge the ministers. So I do feel we have a lot of opportunity. And when you're working on big bits of legislation, the ministers are very good at, making time available. The coronavirus bill was different because that went through in 2 days because it's emergency legislation. But normally you'd get 6 months.
Yes.
You'd get the bill. You'd have a chance to speak to the department, the officials, the minister, check and challenge, and test the water. So there is an opportunity to, push back. It's kind of, but there's just lots of different ways of doing that, which is sometimes a bit frustrating and sometimes quite exciting.
Yes. Well, I'll come to my own views about the bill if we have time. But interesting that, emergency, so it's 2 days, whereas, of course, it would be debated and longer. And, of course, that's why it has to be reviewed every so many days. Now, I want to ask you a bit more about your professional athletics career. You have represented your country, our country, as a gold medalist. On so many, is it 22 times? Those 22 gold medals. May have been making that up.
Oh, I don't. I've never actually added up how many times I competed for GB.
I know. I didn't think that you had, and there'll be stack. You need to come back to the conference so we can actually see the medals.
I'll bring them next time.
Yes, the weight of them. But can you share with it, what is it like to take home that gold medal and be in a podium representing your country with the crowds shouting your name, after all this training? What is that? Is that, adrenaline, euphoria, exhaustion? Can you share that with us?
It is an amazing feeling, but, there's all this build up to the race. There's sometimes, Paralympics, you'll have a couple of years build up, and, on the weeks before, the day before, on the day, there's all these things that have to slot into place about what time you get to the track and what time you warm up and what time you eat and what time you get up. And it's all very process driven. And then, you do the race and you win and you get to do a lap of honour, but there's another race coming behind you. So you've only got so long before, the officials start trying to shove you off the track. And then you have to pick up your accreditation, which you can't go, it's like a passport, which you have to hang around your neck. The only time you don't have to wear it is when you're competing. And then you get your accreditation, you might have to go to doping control, and then you get to do your medal ceremony. So there's a lot of hanging around, which is quite dull and boring. And then suddenly you're out on the podium and national anthem, and it's great. And then basically you're done, and it's like, right, thanks so much, off you go. Sort of, you're back on the bus, you're back in the queue for food. If you're really lucky, your mates on your team might say, well done to you. And then it's sort of back to work. So it's quite an emotional roller coaster of the things that you go through. But it's a very privileged position. To hear your national anthem played is a pretty cool thing to experience.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think about diversity in the law and in sport in terms of gender and race? Because there's a worry that actually the independent fee-paying schools do better at pushing girls and women in sport, for example, than the comprehensive or the state educated school. And I just wonder, in our profession, diversity is improving, but it's nowhere near where it should be. What do you think about it in sport?
It's the same, it is improving, but it's not equal and it's not equitable. So if you look at coaching, we do have a few women at the top of sports organisations, but that sort of almost masks the fact that that's not true through each of the sections, through the head coaches, through, all the various coaching levels. There's been a big push to have equality on boards, which is slowly happening.
Yes.
But I've been talking about this for 25 years. I said 25 years ago, if governing bodies don't have equal men and women on boards, just don't give them any money. Really simple. That sorts things out really quickly. And it's been a bit slower coming than that. But so I think it's useful to know where we've come from, but we're not we're not close. We don't have the equality that we need. And the reality in sport, a lot of girls drop out because they don't like competitive sport. They don't like maybe the clothes that the sport expects them to wear. And I think we have to find, different ways of doing it. Beach volleyball is a sport where the women who play have to wear a bikini.
Yeah.
And the rules slightly changed in Rio, where they did let a team, 2 young women, wear head covers, and they were allowed to wear long tights and long sleeves. But, the bikini bottoms in beach volleyball, they have to be no more than 2 inches measured on the hip. And, the men are allowed to wear board shorts and a vest, and the girls have to wear a bikini. So it's things like that we just need to move on a little bit, because, to be fair, if you're an Olympian doing beach volleyball, you're probably quite happy wearing a bikini. But not everybody wants to. So it's some of those things. We have to change some of the outdated rules, some of the things that I think don't encourage young women to be in sport. And I think the reality is, there's a lot of women in sports admin. They just get a bit bored of the fight and sitting around in lots of committees, going around in circles. They kind of want to move things on a bit. So there's still lots we have to change to make it better.
Absolutely. Tanni, tell me, I want to ask you about mindset. We're in COVID-19 as I interview you, and, one needs to be in the mindset that we're going to get out, and we need positive thinking. Tell me, what do you need a winning mindset? What does one need to be a winner?
It's about having determination. There's an element of you need a bit of an ego to keep putting yourself through the ups and downs of sport. You need to be, quite determined. You need to be able to deal with success and failure. There's lots of different things. You have to want it, because actually for the training or speech, whatever it is, most of what you do is really dull and boring. So you have to be able to not just cope with the exciting bits. You have to deal with the stuff that's hard and a bit of a slog. So and you need a bit of luck. You need something to go your way every now and again. So it's a combination of things. I think one of my biggest frustrations is I've seen incredibly successful athletes, incredibly talented athletes, who maybe don't want to train, who maybe only want to train 2 or 3 times a week, not 10 times a week. Yes. But you have to have that combination of all those things to be successful, and a bit of luck helps. But it was Gary Player and Arnold Palmer both said different versions of, the harder I train, the luckier I become. Yeah, and I think that's not everything, but that's part of it.
I love that. Now, tell me about the RCJ, the Royal Course of Justice. I met Zoe Johnson, Queen's Counsel at Oxford University, when we were on a panel together. And Zoe is a barrister, prosecutes quite a lot of criminal cases, and she is disabled and has a wheelchair. And we had a conversation afterwards about the state of the court building, or the court estate, which is recognised rightly by HMSCT. And of course, there's a move to go online. But I wondered if you can just tell me about when you went to the Royal Course of Justice, the pinnacle of our legal system before the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal sit there. Yeah, what was it like when you went there? And what view did you have about access?
The access was quite interesting. I mean, we kind of had to use a back entrance to get in. And, yes, it's an old building, but it was quite interesting because the case I was going to listen to was about bus access for wheelchair users. And a lot of disabled people turned up. And to be fair to them, they tried to put it in a court where there was a bit more space. Yeah. But actually, they weren't expecting the number of disabled people to turn up. So actually, they started suggesting to me that I might like to get out of my chair and sit on a seat, and then somebody take my chair away. And it was like, no, that's not happening. So the staff were great, but they're working in a really old environment. And I think what they tried to do is they tried to put us near the accessible toilets, which was, kind of quite kind of them. But yeah, there is something that feels very special about the building.
Yes.
Because it's the history and the tradition. But then there's another, it's like, slap down a concrete ramp, and I know there's some stuff you can't. But, we've got some pretty smart architects and designers in this world that we can put in access that looks nice. I don't want an ugly ramp slapped down somewhere. But, it's some of those things that you've got to be quite tough to sometimes deal with the amount of barriers and inaccessibility that you're faced with, that you have to be quite resilient to kind of get over them.
Yes, and let me just ask you about that. We were trying to get on the tube once, and it was so full and so busy. I was appalled by the conduct of, people who were in such a hurry that, they didn't always let you on. And we met. And so actually, what is access in London like? Because, when I've been with you on the wheelchair, you're a Paralympian, I'm not. You're pretty fast and you know the routes to go. But is London actually accessible?
It's one of those, it's better than it used to be. I seem to be saying that a lot in this interview. So it has improved, and there's more drop curbs and there's more accessible toilets, but it's not, the most accessible city in the world. But it's old. So I think what I've seen, there are some very kind people on the tubes who, shove people out of the way and get people to move and are really helpful. Mm-hmm. And then there's people who are, just a bit grumpy and got their heads stuck down. So I think what's true as a disabled person, you have to think, you have to plan a lot more. You have to just think about what you're doing. You can't just jump on the tube the same way as everyone else. But it's so much part of my daily life that I don't really notice anymore. I just kind of get on with it. So, I do get very excited when there's another tube station that becomes step-free. I do get very, very excited about that.
Well, many of us, certainly, women, only really notice these issues when we're pregnant and we're towards the end. And, the ability to walk up the stairs or the ability to carry one's cord bag or whatever. Those are the times the majority of people really notice it, unless they know somebody who has access issues in the main. I was just interested and curious as an awareness point for all of us to just recognize that there are access issues around the cities that we live in.
I think that's important because if you're non-disabled, you just take steps for granted. And, that's some of the challenges that we still face. And, the thing that annoys me more than anything else is everyone who crams next to a tube door who doesn't move down the carriage. I have been known occasionally to shout, "Move down the carriage!" Which is very un-British, isn't it, shouting at people on the tube? I do think when you meet people who are kind and caring, it is really lovely.
Yes, absolutely. And, the great British public, in the main, are kind. Let's not forget. Tanni, I always ask this question, and as a non-lawyer, actually, maybe you can answer it better than the actual solicitors and barristers. But I know your daughter is very interested in law, so maybe she has helped or will help you. Do you have a favourite fictional lawyer and why?
This is fascinating. So I grew up watching, I'm probably going to give you a few answers here, Rumpole of the Bailey.
Yeah.
And that always looked very exciting with the wigs and the gowns and, Rumpole always went in. And then another programme, which I don't know if you even remember this, there was a US TV series called Petrocelli.
Vaguely. The name sounds, I can't remember watching it.
He lived in a caravan because he was building a house forever. And then... but it was always like the American courtroom always seemed very dramatic, and he always won, and he was always the underdog, and he was always sort of triumphed. And I think as a child you think that's actually how the law doesn't work quite like that, does it? I remember sort of watching sort of those sorts of things and just being quite fascinating about watching the difference between the language in British sort of sitcoms about law and American ones. And then I have watched the LA Laws and the Suits of this world. And, my sister's a nurse and, some of the medical programs drive her wild because she's like, it's not real.
Yes,
I agree. Kind of the way I kind of think with some of those, you've got to take them all with a pinch of salt, haven't you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Not take it too seriously. But when I was a child, I wanted to kind of be Rumpole. Yeah, that's who I wanted to be. Grey of the Bailey. It sounds quite cool.
Yes, actually, that could be a book. Come on, something to do in COVID, not that you've not got enough to do. And what about a favourite book and why? A book that's perhaps had an impact in your life?
Oh, I read so much because I live in the northeast of England and I work in London, so I spend a lot of time on trains. And
yes.
I was kind of looking at all my books. So my husband would quite happily read a book and then give it away to a charity shop where I keep all my books.
Yes, me too.
So there's kind of loads. Do you know, the one that I go back to an awful lot is a book I read when I was 6 years old, and it's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Oh.
I read it, maybe every 18 months or so, but it just brings back loads of happy memories of childhood and imagination, and it was the book that sparked my love of reading. So I read that, and then with my pocket money I saved up and I went and bought the series of books from Boots. I remember that. They were 25p each. And that kind of just sparked my love of reading, and that led me into loving history and politics and law. Because actually, if you want to be interested in law, you need to learn to read a lot. So that's the one that just takes me back to a really happy place.
Yeah, wonderful. Tanni, tell me, what do you do for well-being? You are very, very busy in the House of Lords. You sit with charities, you speak, you do quite a lot. You're a mother, a wife, you're up and down the trains. What do you do for well-being and really to avoid burning out?
So for me, it's actually reading is one part of that. Is just having time to read stuff that's different, to briefing papers, and some of the work stuff I have to read, which is some of it's really tough, challenging, hard stuff to deal with. Physical activity is really important to me. It's very different from being an athlete, but going to the gym and just going out on my bike, I find really important, really helpful to me, just to clear my head. It really does make me feel a lot better being physically active. And actually, in lockdown, it's been fascinating because this is the longest I've been at home in more than 10 years. Actually, I feel I've got more control over my life because there's so many things that I'd normally be doing that it's not possible to do everything online. So I've kind of claimed a bit more control of my life. So I do feel guilty because I'm really enjoying being at home, but also being able to I've got the least number of emails I've ever had in my inbox, which makes me feel really good. It's not going to last out of lockdown. But it's things like that, just being able to take a bit more control has been really, really good for me.
Absolutely. Now, I note that you get sent a lot of books and you read a lot anyway. So, and I wonder if you've got a book, memoirs, or the grey years planned to be penned at all? And if so, maybe a film, who would play you? See, I sneaked that in there.
I'd like to think it'd be Angelina Jolie, but it's probably Helena Bonham Carter because I think our hair are quite similar at the moment. I've had a couple of books written about me, my time in sport. I do keep diaries, maybe one day. I'm not sure they'll be terribly interesting to publish those. But I like writing. So maybe one day, but not just yet.
Okay. Well, I should remind you of it at a later date. Can I ask you about your numerous doctorates that you have from several universities? How did they come about? And they're honorary doctorates because you are so inspiring. Firstly, the one from Swansea University. I mean, you've been awarded these because you have, over the last 16 years, a remarkable haul of medals, as not only 5 Paralympic Games, 11 gold medals, 4 silver and a bronze. But you've done an incredible amount of work in the chamber debating issues including welfare reform, assisted suicide, accessibility and equality. So if I start from the beginning, really,
it's really interesting. So, at each university, they have a slightly different process, but, universities award a number of honorary degrees a year and they have a panel and they sit and decide who they'd like to give them to. So I've been very fortunate, but then you get to a point where you think, well, how many should I say yes to? And it's one of those things, if the university think you deserve it, then it's actually, I think it's quite rude to say no, but I'm into my 20s now with honorary degrees, but Helena Kennedy's got way more than me. So not that it's a competition, definitely not. But it's lovely. My husband's he's got a real PhD, as he calls it, in chemistry, and his sort of view is, unless I've had to write 100,000 words, he's not coming to one of the degree ceremonies. So he teases me about that. But it's lovely because you get to go and spend a bit of time at the university, maybe give a lecture, talk to the students, do some work with them. And it's a really nice connection to be part of their celebration.
Absolutely. As is the great debates you do. I mean, you've done a considerable amount on welfare reform, assisted suicide, which is still a hot topic now, and really accessibility and equality, which I asked you about before, about, access and the Equality Act. We know that you're a wannabe lawyer, as it were, but how have you found debating those welfare reform, assisted suicide, and some of the bigger issues? Because as a barrister, I'm usually advocating and arguing about them in the court system. It's very different to you debating them and talking about reform and the wording of statutes. Have you really enjoyed them, and how impactful do you think you are?
Generally, I enjoy them. If you win a vote, it's a really positive feeling, but you're conscious that even if I win a vote, then, there are people who will, very strongly disagree with what I'm doing. I think for me, it sort of came home to me. I worked on LAPSO, legal aid, sentence and punishment of offenders.
Yes.
And in the second reading for that, I think I was number 73 on the speakers list. And you look around the chamber and there were probably 45 speakers before me who were lawyers or barristers or judges. And that's sort of can be quite nerve-wracking, but actually, barristers have a really interesting way of speaking and presenting, and they can be fascinating to listen to. So I think it's not been put off by it, actually, because ultimately they're people, so it's sometimes I make a joke in one debate where I just said, my lords, I'm terribly sorry. I mean, this is very House of Lords funny. It's not real world funny. I regret that I merely did a politics degree, not law, when we were arguing something on politics. But if it's something you believe in and you care about, you have to throw yourself into it and you have to do it. And you can't sort of be worried about who you're speaking against. There are some very eminent people who have spoken against me in debates, but they do it in such a polite and lovely way. Then it's not personal. And that's what I find in the House of Lords. It's very rarely personal. It's about the quality of the debate, and it's about putting information across in the right way. You've got to think about that all the time. That's really positive, I think.
Yes, absolutely. So finally, I wanted to ask you actually about outside interests, outside the Lords. You already told me what you do for well-being, but I noticed in the research that you chair, I don't know if you're still on Transport for London or the London Legacy Development, Chancellor of Northumbria University, UK Active, basically boards and committees outside of effectively the day job. And how important is it to you to sit on those boards and give back, if you like?
It's important to sit on them because actually, one of the things that was made really clear to everyone who goes in as a crossbencher, the thing that got you there, which for me is sport and working in sports committees, not just being an athlete, is you've got to remain an expert in the thing that got you there. And so, sitting on some of these things is really important in keeping up to date, keeping in the loop, learning, developing my knowledge. And some of it's a lot of fun. And the other thing, because I live in the Northeast but work in London, I have a very split life. My husband and daughter are in the Northeast. So, when I'm in London, I have time to work. I'm a bit of a workaholic. I have time to work long hours and I enjoy it. So for me, it's kind of important to have that mixture of things that you're interested in. 'Cause what you don't ever want in the Lords is to talk about something that happened 20 years ago. I mean, it's fine if that's what you debate, but, if you're talking about current legislation, you need to be saying, this is what happened last week. This is what happened last month. This is how it will affect people now, not from a position of knowledge that's years and years out of date. So I think sometimes the current level of knowledge in the House of Lords is not always understood because, people, to be honest, if there's a picture of us in the newspapers, it's always at state opening where, we're in our ermine robes, which, to be honest, we've got to rent for 110 quid, so they're not ours. I don't have my own ermine robes. So, the image from the outside is not actually the reality and doesn't always show. Sometimes the chamber can be really dynamic and others not, but that side of it is not always seen, and I think that's a bit of a shame.
Yeah. And do you have your own coat of arms?
No, I didn't bother getting my coat of arms done. I don't know what I would have had on it, and that's sort of a bit too egotistical, and it's a bit of an odd thing. I don't have a title to pass down, so and I can't remember how much it cost. It was quite expensive. So
yes, I think the research, I was just going to say, I noticed you didn't have one. If you were going to have one, what would be on it for the extortionate amount of money?
There'd have to be a wheel or something, but I'm not sure it'll be very interesting. So I've got a feel, I might have this completely wrong, but I've got a feeling it was 10 to 15,000. So, I've got other things that I can spend that money on when I earn it. So, no, I decided not to bother.
Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson, thank you so much for speaking to me on Talking Law. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson for taking time to talk to me. Thank you again for listening to Talking Law with me, Sally Penni. Do connect with me on Twitter at SallyPenny1. We'd love it if more people heard our podcast, so if you could spare just a couple of minutes to leave us a review, that will help people find us. Until the next episode, do check out the latest Women in the Law UK book. It's a look at how far the profession has come in the last 100 years, featuring career and well-being advice from women and men. It's available now on Amazon. Just search for Talking Law by Sally Penni. And don't forget to visit us at womeninthelawuk.com for all the latest news about our organisation. We look forward to connecting with you. Talking Law was produced by Sam Walker and is a What Goes On media production. Bye for now.